and welcome. Today I'd like to talk to you about how to script magic and how to write patter. Now this I think is a great topic, but I can't claim credit for it. There's a gentleman by the name of Gerard Heaney, and he asked for this. He commented under my video on magic wands and said that he would like to see how to script magic and write patter. So I thought I'd go ahead and do this presentation, mainly for Gerard, but also for anyone else who's interested in this particular topic. If you are a performance artist, if you are interested in performing magic, not just studying it as a hobby, and there's nothing wrong with studying magic as a hobby, but if you want to take it to the next level, if you want to be a performer, this is a critical skill. The ability to write a script, the ability to write your own patter is going to set you apart from all the other magicians. Now, if you're like most magicians, you're going to buy books, you're going to read books, you're going to buy magic, you're going to read the instructions that come with the magic. Here's where you need to get set apart. Once you've studied the books and you've studied the instructions, you need to go a step further and you need to write your own material. It has to be personal for you. I'm going to give you some tips on how to do this, at least how I do it. I'm sure that if you ask 10 magicians how they write their script or how they come up with their pattern, you're going to hear lots of different variations. But I'm going to give you my thoughts on the subject. There are three areas of inspiration, if you will, where I derive most of my patter from, most of my scripts from. Number one is life experience. Life experience. One of the better effects that I used to do, believe it or not, was the professor's nightmare. Now every magician does the professor's nightmare. So how do you set yourself apart as someone who's doing the professor's nightmare? Well, you do it with the script that you're using. And I'll tell you about my script. There was a gentleman that I knew and loved by the name of George Densey. George Densey was a member of the IBM, also a member of the SAM. And as a member of the SAM is where I came to know him. I was a young magician. I was trying to learn magic. And George, I have so many effects that I routinely perform that George Densey taught me. George was a mentor to me, as well as a friend. And George taught me the handling that I use for the professor's nightmare. So after George passed away, I decided to write a script about George Densey, about his life, and sort of, now the script that I use isn't entirely true. I reference George, but here's what comes across to the audience. My affection for George Densey and the way I perform the effect, because he taught me the handling, my affection for him comes across to my audience, and it makes the effect more personable, more important than if I just stood there and made 3 uneven ropes even and then uneven again. Because I'm telling the story of my friend, I'm telling the story of my mentor, just as I'm telling you right now. And that gives a context for the performance that it otherwise wouldn't have, and it makes my professor's nightmare stand out from the rest because it's extremely personal to me. It's based on my life experience. I'll give you another example. Up here, I have my sliding die box. I don't often do sucker effects, and when I do sucker effects, I try not to do them as sucker effects. So here's a true story, and this is the story that I use to present the sliding die box. My mother, one morning, I was getting ready for a field trip at school. Now, this was elementary school. I was very young. It might have been the 2nd grade, 3rd grade, probably maybe even the 1st grade. And she would sometimes walk me down to the bus stop, sometimes not. But on this particular day, she handed me an envelope. And in the envelope was money. And she said to me, I want you to make sure that your teacher gets this money. It's very important because it's for your field trip. Okay. So I'm clutching this because she told me how important this was. So I'm clutching this money. and I'm sitting on the bus clutching this envelope. And I can't see the money, but I can feel it in there. And I know it's in there. There's some change, there's some dollar bills, I know it's in there. So I get to school and I walk up to the teacher's desk and I hand her the envelope. It has not left my hand. She opens the envelope and there's nothing inside. Now I'm not making that up. That happened. It's one of the great mysteries of my life. I don't know what happened to the money. I'm thinking, what am I going to say to the teacher? She's not going to believe me. What am I going to say to my mother? Well, when I present the sliding die box, I tell the story. And I say, and my mother put the money in the box. And I could hear it in there, sklunk. And I could hear it, sklunk. And when I gave it to the teacher, and you open the box, and the box is empty. And the money's returned to the bank. See, that's my presentation for the sliding die box routine. It's based on my life experience. So number one, look at your life experience and see what you can draw from your genuine life experience that will give your magic that level of importance, that level of significance. Life experience. Number two, your interest areas. If you're like most people, you're interested in many things. Magic is one of your interest areas, but you're interested in other things as well. Let me share with you two presentations that I do. I do a presentation of Paul Curry's Out of This World, but I do it with large cards. My cards are about this big because once again, I'm a parlor cabaret performer. I'm not a close-up performer. If I was a close-up performer, I might use playing card size, but I'm not. I perform on a stage. I perform on a platform, so I need larger cards. So I have cards they're about this big, and pictured on each card is a passenger on the Titanic. Some of those passengers survived, and some did not. On the front, right underneath the picture, is whether or not they survived. just a simple word, survived or did not survive, underneath the photograph. I hand these photographs to a spectator. Spectator mixes them face down. They hand them back to me. I take one at a time and I ask, did this person survive or did this person not? They get separated. When the presentation, by the way, I've given one spectator a coin from the year that the Titanic sank, and another spectator a coin from also the same year, but that spectator has coins very well worn. And I tell the spectator that coin belonged to someone who survived, that coin belonged to someone who did not. This one tells me who survived, this one tells me who did not. Remember, the cards are face down, they cannot see the faces. When I turn the cards over, they're perfectly separated into survived and did not survive. That's my version of Paul Curry's Out of This World. There are marketed effects, by the way. I did not come up with the idea of using a Titanic theme. That's been done before. It's been marketed. As far as I know, I'm the only person presenting a platform stage version of it, and I'm the only person doing it with my particular method. My method is unique. I didn't invent the method, but it was invented for another trick. I just pulled it into this particular presentation. So I've always had a fascination with the Titanic. It's a Victorian era, not Victorian era, but just after event, and it just captured my imagination. Another presentation that I do is, and this presentation comes from an Australian video. It's also in a series of books. It's typically done either with playing cards or ESP cards. I use classic monster movie posters. The Bride of Frankenstein, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Invisible Man, the Mummy, King Kong, all those great Universal classics. So I have posters, once again, about this big. And I am able to talk about each poster as I show it. You know, I talk about the history of the Wolfman. I talk about the Bride of Frankenstein. I love these movies. I used to watch these films when I was a kid. I'd stay up and watch the creature features at night. And I just love talking about it. I used to be a member of clubs that did nothing but research Universal horror. So I just adore it, and you know what? My audiences enjoy it when I talk about it. So I take each one, I put it in an envelope. The envelopes are mixed up. When I'm performing for adults, they use a pendulum, and I go through lots of funny bits with the pendulum, and they eventually find the one that I want them to find, or that I've designated as the one, which is the Bride of Frankenstein. When I'm doing it for kids, we have a bit more play with it. The kids run around, they're holding cards, they're mixing them up, they're holding them, they're switching cards back and forth. Eventually the designated child comes up with the one they're supposed to, and they are the hero. It's one of the things I love about this effect, is that my audience member is the hero. So, interest areas. You have life experience, you have your interest areas, then you have the history of the piece itself. And I wanted to give you an illustration of how this works. By history of an effect, what I'm saying is that everything that was invented for a particular purpose. It was invented by someone with a particular context in mind. Now, I want to show you an effect. This is called an astro ball. It's marketed as the astro ball. It's also called a ghost cabinet. It's called a lot of different things. Basically, what you have here is a ball and a glass. The object here is you shut the cabinet and the ball travels into the glass. Boom. That's it. You're done. It's a nice effect. I like it. As you can see, I have one. But let me tell you a little bit about the history of this effect. First of all, it wasn't a magic trick originally. You go back to the Victorian age, back to the heyday of spiritualism, the beginning of spiritualism. I believe that spiritualism has not seen its heyday yet. But at the beginning of spiritualism, which was after 1848, into the Civil War period, it wasn't uncommon for mediums to be locked in cabinets and to produce spirit phenomenon inside of cabinets. Later, you had smaller cabinets used to produce spirit phenomena. And still later, you had magicians beginning to pick up on this. I remember seeing Blackstone's dancing handkerchief. He didn't make a big deal of it, but he used a Cassadaga cabinet, which was a spiritualist cabinet. The cabinet is designed to isolate, to eliminate the idea of tampering, and so it's designed to isolate. This was the original concept from which the astro ball or the ghost box came from. Now, still later, I think it was Stuart James who came up with a fantastic presentation where multiple things happened inside the box. Well, I think what happened is some dealer, I don't know who, but some dealer got a hold of this idea and thought, I'm going to market this thing. Now, when you're marketing a magic product, you streamline it. You just strip it down to its bare bones. Its bare bones is this. A ball goes into a cup. That's the bare bones of the effect. All right, let me show you something. Given the history I've just shared with you about the history of this particular cabinet, this is the cabinet that I currently use. Now, take a look at these two. In my opinion, now you could argue that they both look like magic props, but presentation is everything, yes? This one really does look like a magic prop. This one really doesn't, I don't think. The way I present this, there is in fact a haunted hotel here in Maryland. And I talk about this haunted hotel and the history of the haunted hotel. And there was a young lady, young girl, staying at the hotel. She drowned. And I talk about her doll and how her doll longs to go back to her. So this cabinet was fashioned out of wood from the hotel. And inside is the little girl's doll and the little crib. Now what happens is, when I close the cabinet up, the doll travels from this side over here to inside of its crib. It's a much different presentation. It's a much different look. And as far as I know, I'm the only person doing a astro ball or spirit cabinet like this. So that came from understanding the history of the effect and wanting to present something a little closer to that history. So let me recap. You have your life experience, you have your interest areas outside of magic, and you have the history of the effects that you should research and bring back to bear. And by the way, if you looked at that prop, you notice that I remade the prop entirely. I stripped it down, I refinished it. Generally speaking, don't take a prop and use it as such. Change it, make it your own, make it personal, make it you. Now let me give you a few other ideas. First of all, it's helpful, I think, to study other branches of magic. If you're studying pattern and you're studying presentation and scripting, take a look at work by bizarrist magicians. They have published, I have a book by a bizarrist magician, and what he did was he took standard effects, the sliding die box, the spot card, the professor's nightmare, and he wrote bizarrist presentations for these effects. Now, I would never do one of his presentations, but what he did was he showed you what can be done with a little creative thought. And presentation is everything, folks. Story, the story that you create to present an effect should be strong enough to stand alone. What I mean by that is you're standing up to entertain an audience. If you forgot your magic that day and you don't have your magic with you, you should be able to tell that story and hold that audience spellbound with the story alone. That's how strong your story should be when you do magic. If you look at David Copperfield, especially in his early days, he did this a lot. He told a story, even in the flying illusion, which in my opinion is the greatest illusion of all time. He tells the story of mankind or humankind's attempt to fly. And he shows this montage of effort, of people trying to fly before he does it. It creates a context for the magic that makes the magic more memorable and more magical. So story creates context, and context creates meaning. You know, your audience is sitting there, and in the back of their minds, they're saying, so what? So what? Why is this important to me? Why does this matter to me? Your story, your presentation, your scripting, your pattern will answer that question. Michael Lamar refers to it as Mr. So What. Your pattern, your story, your presentation is designed to answer the question, so what? Ideally, now Harry Anderson in his great book Wise Guy said that ideally you should start with the story and build or invent the magic to supplement the story. That's what you should do. That's not what most magicians do. Most magicians start with an effect they like and work backwards. There's nothing wrong with working backwards. You start with an effect you like and you say, well, what story should, and I'll tell you how this works for me many, many times. I start with an effect that I love, and I want to do the effect, but I don't have the story. Well, I don't perform the effect until the story comes. So I'm going to put that thing on the shelf and just kind of keep it in the back of my mind. At some point, there's a convergence that happens. I have a life experience, or I'm reading a history book, or I'm watching a movie or something, and it just comes home and to roost to me. It really comes home and says, oh, this is the presentation I've been looking for. So you can start with a story and create the magic. Or you can start with the magic and create the story. But in any case, you should be asking yourself a question, and this is another video, by the way. What is the effect? What is the magical effect that I'm trying to communicate to my audience? Is it mind reading? Is it telepathy? Is it premonition? Is it clairvoyance? Am I trying to make something disappear from one place and appear somewhere else? You have to have the effect clearly in your mind when you're crafting your story. So folks, that's a little bit of my creative process in writing. I draw from life experience, I draw from interest areas, and I draw from my knowledge of the history of effects, of the particular effect in question. And that's how I come up with most of my scripting, most of my patter comes from that. By the way, I try not to use someone else's patter. I really don't think it's a good idea. You have your own speech patterns just as you have your own hand movements, and you want to write your own patter as much as humanly possible. Also, it makes you a unique performer when you do that. So, anyway, folks, that's my 2 cents on scripting and writing patter. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Gerard, thank you for the question. If you have other questions, anyone, please put them in the comments below. Please subscribe. I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Take care.